leading some parents to forgo the foods at all. And Sky News had previously revealed how a black market for baby formula has evolved as desperate families struggle to feed their children. Some families even having to turn to stealing, effectively. Let's speak to Daniel Turnbull. He is Senior Director of Markets at the CMA. A very good morning to you, Daniel. Before we get into your report today, just give us a sense of the scale of this problem.
Well, good morning. We're obviously really concerned because infant formula is just such a key product for so many families across the country. We've seen those price rises. We were talking about price increases of 25 or 30% over just a few years. And that's obviously really difficult for families to deal with in their existing budget. So we knew this was an important area for us to look at and to come up with some really helpful things that can hopefully make things better for families.
And I talked, Daniel, there about the desperate measures that some families find themselves turning to, whether that is the black market or even theft.
Yeah, I mean, we heard some of those heartbreaking stories as well, and that really just sort of emphasised to us how important it was to get to the right place on this. I mean, for us, the NHS advice on this market is really clear. It says to people, it doesn't matter which brand of infant formula you buy, they'll all provide what your baby needs in terms of nutrition. But what we've seen is that parents are making their choice of which brand to buy at a time when, obviously, they have a lot on their mind. They also tend to think that higher price means higher quality in this market. And once they've made a choice, they don't tend to switch. But what we've seen in our report is that if they were to be in a position where they could better make those choices that work for them, they stand to save up to £300 in the first year of their baby's life if they want to opt for those cheaper brands.
So Daniel, what are you guys then recommending today? What are you saying this needs to change?
So we're recommending a full package of measures to help put parents in that stronger position to make those choices. The first measure that we're recommending is that in hospitals, if people are given infant formula, then that should be in unbranded containers so they're not unduly influenced towards particular brands. Second, in hospitals and in retail settings, there should be really good access to information for parents so that they understand that NHS advice about the different brands. Third, in the supermarkets and other retail settings, we think that infant formula all needs to be grouped together on the shelf so parents can really easily look along the shelf edge and compare those prices. Fourth, we think that the ban on advertising infant formula should be extended to follow-on formula so that parents aren't unduly influenced by that advertising. And finally, we think that consumers should be allowed, or it should be clarified that they are allowed to use loyalty points or grocery vouchers to be able to buy infant formula. We think together this is a really strong package for consumers to put them in a much better position.
Why the ban on advertising? I read in your report there is effectively high regulation because they're trying not to discourage breastfeeding, if you like. But isn't the point, for some parents that isn't actually a choice? So are you guys not calling for that regulation around discouraging breastfeeding? Wouldn't that help if that was got rid of?
So, look, we've spoken to the UK government and to governments in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and they've been really clear to us that supporting breastfeeding is a key public health priority for them. We've heard that and we respect that. But what we've said is that we think there are other really key ways, like the 5 areas that I've set out, that we can really shift perceptions in this market and how consumers engage with it.
But Daniel, I suppose
what we have said, though...
So just my question, though, is, in what way would having more competition and, frankly, cheaper baby formula, how does that impact on breastfeeding in the sense that, the point we're raising here is about costs. Now, breastfeeding is essentially free. I don't understand why having a more competitive, greatly reduced cost of infant baby formula would somehow discourage women from breastfeeding.
So, look, it's important to say that here at the CMA, we are expert in how markets work and how consumers engage with them. We're not experts in public health or anything like that. So we have spoken to those governments. They've been really clear to us that that is the position and that it's in line with the best advice from the WHO. So we respect that. What we have said, though, is if governments decide that it gets to the point where they want to revisit their position on that and consider whether it would be appropriate to lift that ban on advertising price promotions, then we stand ready to work with them on that.
OK, Daniel, really interesting stuff. Clearly a very important subject. That's Daniel Turnbull there from the Competition and Markets Authority. And don't forget, if you want more on this story, it is a Sky News investigation. Tom Parmenter has been looking at this for the last couple of years. Just scan the QR code on your screen right now to access the Money blog and read more about this really important story that the Competition and Markets Authority has issued a report on today. Just going to bring you up to date with some breaking news, though, in the last couple of minutes, and that is that Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has spoken to Donald Trump. We've had a statement in from Downing Street. It says that the Prime Minister was pleased to host President Trump's special envoy to the United Kingdom, Mark Burnett, at Downing Street last night, during which he took a call from President Trump and discussed his forthcoming visit to the United States. Mr. Burnett and the Prime Minister agreed on the unique and special nature of UK-US relations, the strength of our alliance and the warmth of the connection between the two countries. They emphasised the huge potential for even stronger collaboration on trade, tech and cultural matters between the US and the UK, and looked forward to working. So there you go. That is a confirmation of a telephone call between President Trump and Keir Starmer last night. Interesting in that readout from Downing Street. They did talk about trade, tech and culture, but no specific mention of tariffs or indeed of Ukraine, which is fascinating given that those are two subjects I would suggest have dominated UK-US relations over the past week or so. But there is an expectation now that Keir Starmer will visit the White House and President Trump at some stage later on this month. And we'll have more on that story, of course, at the top of the hour. Well, speaking about tariffs, it comes as the European Commission has hit back at Donald Trump's plans for a reciprocal trade policy, calling it a step in the wrong direction. The US President has promised to target countries which charge tax on American imports by matching them with a reciprocal tariff that could include VAT. And according to Capital Economics, that could leave the UK economy taking a £24 billion hit. Let's get more on that now with the Chief Executive of the Centre for Economic Security. That's Rebecca Harding. Rebecca, very good morning to you. Just explain to us and people at home what a reciprocal tariff is, and particularly in relation to VAT.
OK, so what this is, effectively, President Trump has said, is a comprehensive overhaul of the US trade relations with the rest of the world. So, I mean, this is basically saying we are going to recalibrate absolutely everything. And instead of looking at a blanket tax or a blanket tariff that he has done with, say, iron and steel, what he's doing is he's saying, on a country-by-country basis, he's going to look at absolutely everything. So he's going to look at VAT, he's going to look at subsidies, he's going to look at levies, all sorts of things, not just tariffs. And he's going on a country-by-country basis to impose taxes and measures exactly the same for every single country in the world. So it's breaking it down to things like VAT, digital services, taxes, everything is in scope. It's absolutely huge.
It is huge, clearly, but the impression you get from the market reaction is that this is at least going to be methodical and may well take time. Is that fair?
I think it is fair. And as always with President Trump, there's an element of, well, is this a negotiating tactic? And is this something that, you know, we need to have on our radar screens, but we're not quite sure what's going to happen next. But what has happened is that President Trump has invoked the authority of the Office of the Trade Representative, US Trade Representative, the Department of Commerce, and most importantly of all, actually, the International Emergency Economic Power Act, which is basically national security security. So if you look at all of his memos and his original memo back in at the beginning of February on international trade, it mentioned national security 12 times. So it's really important to understand that this is President Trump reconfiguring everything, but it does look like it's going to be methodical. So he has commissioned research and all sorts of things around this as well. And there's plenty of scope for negotiation. So, I mean, we're going to see India. India's out there. President Modi, Prime Minister Modi is out there at the moment with President Trump. And President Trump has already said, well, India is a tough place to do business, but they're going to be buying a lot more oil and gas. So maybe there's always scope for negotiation.
Yeah, it does seem that he's very willing to make exceptions where he thinks the US is winning. Isn't that right, Rebecca? What do you make, though, with this figure of 24 billion that could hit us here in the UK? I mean, it's a hell of a lot of money.
It's a very important amount of money because obviously at a time when the government is trying to grow the economy, having a 24 billion hit on the economy is going to be very important indeed and very negative. And I've just actually come back from the United States where government people over there were saying, well, we just need the UK economy to grow because we need the UK to buy more defence equipment, more automotives, more oil and gas, etc., etc. So all of the priority areas where, obviously, Keir Starmer and President Trump have been talking already. Those are important areas. The most important thing is that this is going to create uncertainty and obviously look at increasing costs for UK business just in terms of monitoring what's going on. So this sort of fog of war that you see all the time with President Trump is extremely unsettling for UK businesses in terms of their relationships with their US partners.
Yeah, unsettling indeed. And what do you think is the best approach for the UK in all of this? Many people have suggested, we shouldn't put tariffs if that's what happens to us, that the UK should take a more pragmatic approach because ultimately, I suppose the expression is it is a trade war that we would never win, if you like.
Nobody wins from a trade war. And I think it's very important to remember that you have to import in order to export. These are supply chains. Supply chains are global and we're all very dependent on each other. And the UK and the US are very dependent on each other in terms of defence and financial services. So we have a very close relationship with the United States. Prime Minister Keir Starmer will not want to upset that relationship, but he will want to make sure that our own national security is assured. So what's likely to happen, I think, is that the UK will become closer strategically to NATO partners in Europe. We'll start to look more strategically at how we work more closely with the European Union and how we effectively create a sort of lower risk and less inflammatory relationship with the US as well. We're in a strong position.
As in, it could push us closer to Brussels in the end. Rebecca, fascinating stuff. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Rebecca Hardy there from the Centre for Economic Security. OK, let's return to one of the big stories today. Clearly what's happening in Munich at that security conference. In the last hour, we've heard from President Zelensky of Ukraine, who says he doesn't think the US currently has a plan for peace. That's despite Donald Trump's move to hold talks with Vladimir Putin to bring what he says is an end to that war. Let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who's at that Munich security conference. Deborah, very good morning to you. What did President Zelensky have to say today?
Good morning. Well, he was very clear that when it comes to any sort of peace talks with Russia, that Ukraine needs to be absolutely central to that. And the choreography is really important as well. He said that it must be that the Ukrainians are speaking to the Americans, speaking to the Europeans, and only then, when they've got their position decided, would they be speaking to the Russians. He said, I asked him specifically, because obviously Donald said last night that the Russian officials would be coming to Munich and there would be talks here. That's been ruled out by the Kremlin. And also Volodymyr Zelensky said he had no plans to meet any Russians here. And he also said there's no point in meeting Russian officials just to meet Russian officials. He's clear that he very much needs to have an agreed position, a position of strength, before he will be engaging in these sorts of talks. And then he was asked a lot about the language that's been used by the US administration in the last couple of days in Brussels, and then also Donald Trump on the phone to Vladimir Putin. The new US Defense Secretary, he basically made some concessions, it would seem, saying that it's unrealistic for Ukraine to think that it can retake its borders to where it was in 2014 when Russia first invaded Crimea. He said that there's going to be no membership for NATO as part of any peace settlement, and also said that no US troops will be on the ground in Ukraine as part of any international peacekeeping force that is being discussed as a possibility should the two sides agree to a ceasefire to maintain that peace. Now, I asked Volodymyr Zelensky whether he still thought, because he told me last week when I saw him in Kyiv, that it would be a major mistake for any international security force that's sent to Ukraine not to include a US element. He didn't directly address that question, but he did then, in other questions and answers, say that, of course, international forces with a US element are really important. And actually, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that J.D. Vance, the vice president, has basically not completely ruled out the idea of US troops on the ground, saying that, you know, maybe if negotiations with Moscow were to fail, then that is still potentially on the table. And actually the Germans have been very blunt in their criticism so far of how the new administration is handling this whole process, saying that it's not wise, really, to give concessions in the way that the new Defence Secretary did in Brussels this week by taking things off the table, such as US troops and also the land situation. And so there's a lot of tensions here in the conference, and there's going to be key meetings taking place between major members of the US administration, senior top European officials. The Ukrainians are here, and clearly the Russians aren't.
OK, Deborah, it is an ongoing story, that conference taking place over this weekend. Thank you very much indeed, Deborah Haynes, there live for us in Munich. Some more breaking news coming in to Sky Centre in the last couple of minutes, and that is that we got the names of the 3 Israeli hostages that we believe are due to be released tomorrow. They've just come in to us here at Sky Centre. They are Sasha Alexander Trufanov, Sagi Dekel Shen, and Yahir Horn. We believe that they are now likely to be released tomorrow. Clearly, there's been concerns this week, haven't there, about the ongoing deal and whether it would be, whether it managed to continue to hold. But it does look like those Israeli hostages will be released tomorrow, Saturday, February 15th. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be talking about local journalism. Many have suggested that it's been having a slow death in recent years, but has that been exaggerated? We'll be speaking to one founder of a start-up here in London after this quick break. Stay tuned.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Slide minutes, slide better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Very welcome back to Business Live. Now, the decline of local media in recent years has been described as a threat to democracy. Hundreds of local newspapers have gone out of business over the past decade, but there is a raft of new startups trying to stem the tide. Among them, the Bristol Cable, the Manchester Mill, and the London Centric. Well, let's speak to Jim Waterston, former media editor at The Guardian, who is now editor of and founder of London Centric. Jim, very good morning to you. I think let's start, if we can, about just how difficult things have been for local journalism in the last decade or so. Hundreds of jobs, thousands of jobs lost, and lots of even quite famous titles disappearing.
Yeah, it's been a really tough time because the whole business model was based on everyone bought their local paper because it had the cinema listings, it had the sports in it, it had everything you needed. And that need went, and the replacement was these websites that were free, and that meant they had to be supported by advertising. And unfortunately, the end game of that meant that all of these once great local newspaper titles ended up with websites just doing desperate clickbait articles. I'm sure all of the people watching this have clicked on some article on their local newspaper website and found that it hasn't lived up to expectations and it's covered in adverts and they can barely read it anyway. So I'm trying to do something a bit different.
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, you've got the London Centric where you are, but this is happening elsewhere in the country as well. I talked, didn't I, about the Bristol Cable, the Manchester Mill. What are you trying to do, Jim?
Well, I'm trying to do something that people want to read. I think people do fundamentally want to read about the places that they live. They want to understand why it is that their council or that the theft in their area is through the roof on this particular thing. News that's relevant to people's lives is something that makes us feel like we understand our place in the world. And in the case of London, you've got, a handful of journalists covering a city of 9 million. And when you do have people, they're trying to hit these click targets. So my pitch is I'm going to do a lot less journalism, but I'm going to do it to a really high quality.
But it is journalism, let's be frank about this, that people have to pay for. Who's prepared to do that? Because, as you say, it's frustrating sometimes, but, people have got used to accessing free journalism, haven't they?
I think that's changing. I think a lot of people are understanding that if you want good quality media, you're going to have to pay a bit. Now, I am very aware of the pressure that's on people's pockets at the moment, but in just 5 months, thousands of people have signed up to support London Centric. And the more money that comes in, the more local journalism I can do, and hopefully the more people subscribe. So the business story here is I hope that eventually quality will triumph over just chucking anything out there and hoping that it hits.
Just finally and briefly on that, though, I mean, is it going to be viable? You've just started this. Can you see a vision where this actually does work?
It's working. It's working. I've got a business that's gone from, I've hit my year 3 target after 4 months. It's flying better than I could ever have dreamed of. And I think local news has sort of hit the rock bottom point in the UK. And I think this is the start of rebuilding something new, something that serves people in a different way and hopefully tells them something about the places that they live.
OK, Jim, from one journalist to another, the more journalism, the better. So good luck with it all. Jim Waterson there, who is the editor of London Centric. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, that is it for me on Business Live for this morning. Now, we were due to bring you a report because of breaking news we couldn't about Ed Conway looking into gold and the Bank of England. Essentially hasn't got enough of it. You can access that report, by the way, on the Sky News website or indeed on the app. I would encourage you to do so. We'll hopefully also bring it to you at 4:30 this afternoon when we're back with Business Live. Up next, it is Sam Washington with the very latest headlines, including the naming of those 3 Israeli hostages who are due to be released by Hamas tomorrow. So do stay tuned to that. That's up next at the top of the hour here on Sky News.